All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Right, welcome to our Alliance of Angels workshop on building a go-to-market strategy in partnership with Avalara and FreshChalk. Right, just a few notes on the logistics. We want this to be an interactive session. So if you have questions for our speakers, please feel free to jump in. You can speak up, or if you're shy, you can also use the chat windows in Zoom. Right. Also, we do ask that if you are not speaking, if you don't have a question, please keep yourself on mute. Right, just for respect for all the other attendees, so we can all hear the speakers really clearly. Right, and my name is Yi Jane. I run the Alliance of Angels. It's an angel group here in Seattle. There's 140 angel investors in my organization. Every year we put about 10 million into 20 companies. Right, most companies that are fundraising from us, they're looking for between $500,000 and 1.5 million, and our typical check size is 250 to 500. Right. Sector-wise, about half our investments are IT, about a quarter are consumer, the rest are life sciences, hardware, energy, etc. We are a sector-agnostic investor and a stage-agnostic investor. Right, so if you're interested in fundraising from us and sharing your business plan with myself, feel free to send me a note. There's an email at the bottom of this slide. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm also going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to hand control of the meeting over to Sanjay, who's going to share his screen and also introduce himself and Liz. Please go for it.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ishan. I'm going to share my screen. All right, I need to swap these views. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining this session. I'm super excited to be here and support, help, talk to, converse with all of the entrepreneurs here on the call. I'm also excited because we have Liz Pearce here. Liz is a celebrity in the Seattle entrepreneurial circles. Most of you know.
Absolutely not true.
That is but Liz has amazing experiences, and I'll let her talk about it. A very quick background about me before we dive right into this presentation itself. I started off my career as a developer programmer, then went to business school and went over to the dark side, joined the marketing side, business side of the house. Worked with Microsoft for about 5 years and then went down the startup path. I've worked with smaller companies than Microsoft since then. In 2013, a couple of my co-founders and I also founded 9 Mile Labs, which is the template you see here. I've apologized to Liz. I've never gotten around to changing this template on this PowerPoint deck. We have changed the content a lot. So what you'll see is our latest and greatest thinking about go-to-market strategies. After 9 Mile Labs, where we invested in about 70 to 80 odd companies, spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs, sharing with them all parts of the business life cycle. We shut down the accelerator, and then I joined this company called Avalara. Super exciting ride. I run product marketing at Avalara right now. And that's about my background. Liz, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I never strayed to the dark side of coding. So I started in marketing. My early jobs in my career were at big tech companies, PlayStation, Google, and then Amazon. And then I got the startup bug and left and started working with a company, a SaaS B2B project management software company here in town called Liquid Planner. As their first marketer, and I worked my way up from director of marketing to CEO there, and I was CEO for 5 years. So total of 11 at Liquid Planner. I did some time at an augmented reality startup in Portland called Stream as chief revenue officer before joining up with my co-founders of FreshChalk about 1.5 years ago. So FreshChalk is a site where you can follow your friends and get connected to the recommendations that they have for their vet and their house painter or their general contractor or whatever local pro or business that they've used and had a good experience with. So I've moved into B2C, and we're building a two-sided marketplace. So in the early stages of that, we just raised our seed round at the end of last year. So that's where I am today.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks a lot, Liz. And the exciting part is, while I've been solely focused on B2B companies all my career, Liz does have experience on both sides of the house. And the exciting thing for me is she's able to add that perspective on consumer startups or consumer businesses. Vijay, do you want to go ahead and post that poll right now? It would be great to kind of see the background of folks. There you go.
I've just started.
Yeah, it's a very short poll, folks. It's about 5 questions. If you can just take a quick second to fill that out so we can see the profile of people on this call right now. Liz, do you see it on your screen too?
See it on my screen.
Yeah, okay.
And for those of you that have finished the poll, just maybe take a quick peek to make sure you're muted. We still have a few people who are not muted and want to make sure we can keep the audio clear.
Yeah. Thanks.
B2B is winning.
B2B is winning. The winner. Okay. 34. We're getting there. So while people fill this out, I will share the results at the end of this poll. But let's start with the session and give you a quick intro of what our objective is today. What we don't want to do, just to be clear, is give you a presentation or do a presentation where we share things that are not going to be useful to you right away. The objective is to share some real practical ways in which you can start marketing your business. Marketing is associated with the dark arts. It's a voodoo art that people just feel like it's not something they can do, especially if people happen to be a technical founder. And I really believe that that's one of the reasons why a number of entrepreneurs ignore that part of the business. And my first comment would be, not only is it not mysterious, not only is it not hard, it also is very, very it has to be very, very integrated in the way you think about your all-up business. So our objective is to demystify marketing and just give you some real practical tools. We're not going to boil the ocean here. We're going to give you very practical tools that you can use in order to be able to start marketing right after this presentation. Liz, anything else you would add to that?
No, I think you made some important points there. I think one of the challenges with marketing is the temptation to try to do everything. And we're going to try to discourage that, keep you focused.
That's great. Okay, so the results of the poll are in. We have about 65% B2B among our audience, 35% B2C. 59% pre-revenue companies, 41% revenue generating, so it's close to half and half. 72% pre-funding, 28% funded, and then 70% of the companies are pre-seed of the fundies that are companies that are funded, I guess. 70% are pre-seed, 22% seed, and then 9% Series A. So, okay, that gives us a good perspective on the audience we have.
And we had a comment in the chat from someone who thought we were missing the B2G option.
Oh yeah, that's right. So we know at least one B2G company out here, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's dive right into this. So let's start with the basics. What is marketing? Anybody want to take a crack at that question? Go ahead, unmute yourself, share what you think marketing is about.
No one wants to get the wrong answer on the first question.
All right. So
well, I would say awareness, right?
Yeah.
Also, it depends on, who you're marketing to, depends on where you're at in your company's, the stage.
I'd say it's presenting your product to the market.
Yes.
Oh yeah, good.
That's an excellent one. What else?
Marketing is sales support.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Not all of it, but there's definitely. Go ahead, Liz. You were saying something.
That was a B2B person talking.
There you go. I was going to say that. In B2B, definitely marketing is sales support. There's no doubt about it. Well, let's do a very generic description of what marketing is. It's about persuading your prospective customers to be able to buy or try or join your product. It's as simple as that. And we'll break this down into what are the steps it involves, but that's essentially what the job is. Now, what you do in order to be able to do it, that's where the rub lies, and that's why we'll get right into it. But we will describe the steps, but we also want to give you some context as to what stage of a company is marketing really relevant in. And the marketing, as it is talked about typically in either startup or larger companies. So while we were running 9 Mile Labs, we had built out a framework. We called it the 9 Mile Innovation Framework, but ignore the name. I think the stages here are still relevant, and I'll take a brief moment to describe what this talks about. And then I'd love to kind of share with you what this implies for your business. So we divided it into 9 different milestones. It starts off with a team, and we always said, you need 3 key roles on a team: a hacker, a hustler, and a visionary. Now, of course, the number of people might vary, but those are the 3 roles that are critical. But starting with that, you need to start off with a pain point that your customer has. A customer has a problem, a need, and you need to be able to solve it. And that sometimes precedes a lot of what entrepreneurs end up doing. Entrepreneurs start off with being fascinated with the product, which, as you notice, is actually M5, which is the last part of this particular circle. You understand your customer's pain point. You understand what the competition, what other vendors in this space are doing. What is the benefit you offer? What is the value proposition that you offer to your prospective customers? And then you start building a product. And the product in the early stages may be something that is a prototype. It may be something that you draw up with your hand on a piece of paper. It may be a PowerPoint slide. But the sophistication or the fidelity of that product changes as you iterate through this process, the nail it part of the process. And that nail it process is also called achieving product market fit. And that part is something that you cannot ignore while you're building your business, because if you don't do this, anything else you do in terms of putting money into the business, putting time, hiring people, is going to be lost. And we know of many, many instances where people have gone through this nail it part of the process, and then they go to the scale it part of the process, which is where you start pouring money. And then they discover that they don't quite have the level of scalability that they want to desire, that they need out of the business. And they go back to the nail it part. And that's perfectly okay. That's sometimes called pivoting the business. But then once you have nailed it, then you start marketing your product or business. You achieve customer traction as a result of marketing. You build a business model that allows you to be scalable, repeatable, and profitable. You have to remember that ultimately the objective of your business is to be scalable, repeatable, and profitable. And then you define what your funding strategy around your business is going to be. And again, this proceeds in an iterative mode. And like I said, you might be in scale it mode, you think, but then you end up going back because you've discovered that was not the business model that was going to be successful. So Liz, anything you would add to this?
Just maybe to set the expectation that you will probably walk around the nail it circle many, many, many times as you build the business. And it's cheaper to stay in the first circle before moving to the second one.
Yes.
At any point. I mean, there's always some element of thinking and planning and testing and trying some go-to-market things, even in order to get the kind of validation you need to determine whether you've found product market fit. But I think it's not uncommon to spend a fair amount of time here in both B2B and B2C.
Correct.
There's 2 B to Gs, so now we have to be inclusive.
Yeah, I just noticed that on the chat too. Okay, great. And one other thing I would add is that you really start thinking about pouring money into marketing only in your scale-up phase. That's where you really need to start doing it. Now, you will experiment with stuff as you are going through the nail-it phase, as you're trying to achieve product market fit, because what you're trying to understand is what works, whether it is messaging or marketing channels, etc., which we'll get to later. But okay, enough said about this framework, but this does give you the context of where a complete go-to-market strategy lives in the overall evolution of your business. So here are the 5 steps we think are critical to your go-to-market strategy. And if there's anything you took away from this, if this is the slide you took away, it'll help you really simplify how you think about marketing your business. The first one is you need to understand your customer. You need to know who your customer is. If you're a B2B business, you're thinking about, what is the customer segment? What are the verticals you're going to target? What is the geographical location of the customer that you're trying to target, etc. The next step is you define the positioning and messaging that describes accurately your product or your service. And we'll discuss what are the ways to do that. The third step is you need to understand where your customers congregate or get together once you know who your customer is. And then take those messages that you built in step 2 to apply to where your customers congregate in step 3. And then probably the most important piece of it that we've mentioned before, the iterative nature of it all, which is you have to instrument your business, your product, your marketing to be able to test, measure, learn, and execute. If you're spending a single dollar without having the ability to track it and measure it, you wasted that money. So this test, measure, learn, execute cycle is just incredibly critical to the overall process. Liz, any comments from you on this?
I think that all of these are very stage specific, and one of the traps maybe at some of the early stages is over investing in one of these areas at the expense of another. So for instance, if you look at this slide and you're like, okay, I'm going to spend the next 4 months understanding my customer, and I'm going to go interview tons of customers, and I'm going to write it up and share it with my team, and we're going to understand our customer. You're probably over investing at the expense of starting to learn about what messages work and understanding where those customers are online or offline. So you get a little of the way towards that understanding, and then you might move on to step 2 and step 3 with some incremental tests and experiments and things like that. And the same thing does apply to the question of whether you instrument your product for analytics and to what extent. Obviously, you want to understand what's working, but you don't want to delay making progress on your product or your business, while you take 2 months to put in an analytics platform on the back end. So, yes, you want to measure, but measure within reason. Look to confirm your instincts or refute your instincts with the data. It doesn't have to be perfectly precise in the early stage. You're looking for direction.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You are trying to move quickly because quite likely a large majority of your experiments fail. So you don't want to spend an inordinate time instrumenting in a way that is not going to be useful eventually.
Yeah, it may seem like common sense, but I do think there is a temptation, especially in tech companies, to want to back every decision up with data, and you have to let go of that need, I think, in the early days, because time is the enemy, and you have to move quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, which is in the early stages, you're not going to be talking to enough customers to have a data-centric view or a data-centric decision. It's going to be based on a lot of what you talk to customers about, and then combine it with your gut instincts about your hunches about the business, etc. There's no doubt about that.
There's a question in the chat. Any rules of thumb to follow to know when you've achieved product market fit? I think they're probably very different in B2C versus B2B on this question. I'm happy to speak to the B2C.
Yeah, please do.
Side.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with B2C, you're always kind of striving for that natural organic growth, word of mouth, awareness, traction, virality. You know, you want to see people coming to your site and discovering your site in a way that is, you know, not just driven by paid channels. Or you have other metrics that that are specific to your business that you're hitting industry benchmarks for. So for instance, if you have a consumer product company, you want to see a low return rate or a repeat order rate, indicating that you've, you know, hit a nerve with that customer. If you are a social network or a community, you want to see return visits and high retention. And so you probably understand, you know, the top handful of metrics for your business and have a goal in mind for where you'd like to be. And you're kind of scanning the environment to see if you're making progress and getting to the right point on those specific metrics.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time thinking about it as an investor, and our mark was we are looking for 5 to 10% growth week over week to be able to figure out whether you've achieved product market fit. Now that's a tall order. That's like 20+% growth month over month. But the thinking goes that you have to get to a point where people are snatching the product out of your hands rather than you appearing to shove it. Now, in early stages, you'll be pivoting, you'll be learning, and it's not easy. Now, that 5 to 10% growth, just to be clear, is not necessarily in the number of customers you have. It might be in the usage of your product. If you are selling to enterprises, if you're selling a product to an enterprise company, you're not going to be selling enterprise companies, you know, week over week. But the amount or the rate at which the adoption of your product within an organization grows will give you a sense for whether you have achieved some level of product market fit or not. Now, in an enterprise or even a mid-market organization, you'll have to use a combination of, you know, usage within an existing customer along with new customers that are adopting your product. But if you have achieved that level of customer traction, you know that you have achieved product market fit.
And you'll have no problem raising money.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you should not have the expectation that you're getting there like in the first 3 months of putting your product out there. It's, you know, that is a really big challenge to hit those kind of numbers. And part of what makes an entrepreneur great is their persistence and their willingness to keep trying different things. If you believe fully that you have a solution that addresses the problem, you know, sometimes you just have to keep pushing to get there. And, you know, that's where the step 5 comes in.
Right. That's exactly right. Okay, so let's dive into number 1, which is understanding your customer. So what does it mean when we talk about understanding your customer? When we ask an entrepreneur who's your customer, even if they're a consumer-based entrepreneur, if they tell us that everybody's my customer, they've already failed test number 1. Because even if you are a truly consumer-based company where everybody could potentially buy your product, you need to start somewhere. And you need to have a good, solid understanding of what is the best place for you to start, even though eventually you may cover the globe, which is always doubtful. But we do think about 2 ways of thinking about it. And I'll talk about the B2B and I'll let Liz talk about the consumer side of things. There are a number of different ways in which you can classify and get a better understanding of your customer so you can start targeting them. And you could segment them by company sizes. So, you know, one way to use it, and this is what we use at Avalara, for instance, and it's a good general purpose segmentation. You know, Gartner has something like this. IDC has a similar kind of structure for company size based segmentation, which is Companies that are $1 to $5 million in revenue, they're called VSBs, or very small businesses. You have a small business, which is $5 to $50 million. Mid-market is anywhere from 50 million to $1 billion. That's a large spread there. And then enterprises are typically associated with $1 billion plus. Now remember, these are general purpose segmentation. What you'll realize as you start running your business from a B2B perspective is that your segmentation may be different. You may only have 2 segments that are interested in buying your product. It may be like small, which is under 50 million, and then over 50 million. It may be as simple as that. But again, as you learn more about your business and your customers, you will begin to appreciate how customers buy your product, and that's the way you perform your segmentation.
Yeah, and if I can just add to this, to your B2B example, and I think we were supposed to update this from the last conversation, but there's one other way to stripe your potential customers for B2B that can be very helpful, and I learned this the hard way, which is team function. So if you're selling into a business, the company itself may be in retail or manufacturing, but you're selling into the accounting department. So the vertical may be irrelevant to whether you have a great product for your buyer. You really want to know if they're in accounting, if they're in HR, if they're in marketing, if they're in engineering. So that's another one to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And in B2B, that is going to, in addition to whatever other segmentation you're doing, it is critical. You cannot move forward without that. If we as Avalara don't target people or buyer personas that think about sales taxes, which is what Avalara does, by the way, then we've lost the battle. There's none of the other segmentation is going to be relevant if we don't know who the role is within the company that we want to target.
There was a question in the chat on B2B, which was, would you target one unit, division, or office as the marketing target, and then scale to adjacent units in the same company?
And this is probably a question relevant to Liquid Planner too, Liz, but I'll take a crack at this one. Yes, many companies have actually been very successful at doing that, and that's part of sometimes what is called consumerization of IT, where you target a single division or a group of users within a company. Once they start using the company, and there are other groups with other pockets within the company that are using the product, then you go to the IT department and say, hey, look how many pockets of these users are using it. Don't you want to bring it under management? Don't you want to make sure that you are making good use of your budgetary resources, and you have appropriate governance over your software infrastructure? And so then you go in and sign an enterprise agreement with that customer. And one company in the local area that has done a great job of it is Smartsheet. This is exactly how they've grown. And that's absolutely a relevant strategy. Not easy, because you have to invest a tremendous amount in being able to get those individual users. And the reason we use the term consumerization of IT is because you're almost treating those customers like an individual, not as a business in many ways. But once that individual starts using it, by definition, these are collaborative products. And so they start using it as a work group, and then usage can expand. Liz, any thoughts from you on this?
Yeah, I mean, you're really winning when your product is making such an impact on a division or a department within a company that other departments start to take notice, and the product sells itself. Yep. When that is not happening, depending on what size company you're targeting, we had a lot of luck doing really a cross-functional outbound sales campaign where we would get permission to do a testimonial from a user only if we use it within the company, with other conversations we had within the company. And so they didn't have their neck on the line for publicly, advocating for your product, but their experience with it could be used in the sales process to other divisions or departments.
Oh, that's such an interesting strategy. I'd never heard about that one. That's a good one. Yeah, that's awesome.
It's really hard to get. Everybody wants testimonials, but people either aren't allowed to put their name out there, their company name, or they just don't want to. But if you can use that to cross-sell within a company, it can be very effective, and it saves them from those types of concerns.
Yeah, that's great. Some of the, and by the way, Dropbox is another example of it doing exactly that, which is they actually acquired a number of customers as consumers. People started using those at work, in work groups, started sharing documents internally, and then they were able to expand usage within the organization.
Yeah, Slack is a good example.
Yeah, Slack is a great example. Again, those products need to have some kind of network effects for that to be effective, clearly. Other ways of segmenting verticals and industries, these three are the top three verticals for Avalara, for instance. These are, retail is huge. Retail is by far number one for us. Manufacturing is number two. And technology companies, not just software companies, is big. But again, it could be, depending on what business you're in, you have to be able to determine where is the most pain for what you're trying to do. And then demographics, for consumer, it may be less important, but still, for B2B, it is probably less important than it is for consumer, but it can be relevant at times. Liz, do you want to go over the consumer?
Sure. So for consumer, I think the top one is really important. Whether you're selling a product or a service, or in our case, building a marketplace, you do have a kind of type of customer in mind. In our case, with FreshChalk, we are looking at people who own a home, have kids, have pets, have all of the trappings of family life that require a lot of services and a lot of support. We're not as successful with younger people who, they may go to the barber or the gym, but that's the extent of their service consumption. So that becomes very dominant for us. Behavioral is also very interesting. I think in a lot of consumer businesses where there's at least some element of like a user-generated content strategy or something like that, someone's tendency to, be social or be active online can be very relevant to how you set up your marketing programs. And of course, demographics in consumer are really important as well.
Any questions about this at all? Keep moving. So one of the concepts that a lot of you have probably heard about is buyer persona. And I wanted to discuss what exactly that is, because, when you start approaching investors for funding for your business, they're likely to throw some of those terms around, and you want to make sure that you understand that term as you answer that. So a buyer persona at its basic, and please ignore this slide for now, because this might actually confuse you until I explain this. Buyer persona is the idea that you have a number of different roles or titles within an organization, within your target customers, within your target organizations, that have the same buyer journey, meaning they have the same trigger for buying your product. It may be regulatory, it may be a change in let's say the management setup, and I'll describe some of the triggers later. But the idea is they always have the same trigger, they always have the same success factors, and those are the tabs up top on this slide. They have the same success factors, meaning they want the same benefits out of that product. They have the same perceived barriers, which is there are always going to be people who go into the consideration phase for a piece of software or a product, but never end up buying it. They have certain set of barriers. Those are some of the barriers that you as a business need to overcome. And that's what that perceived barriers is about. Decision criteria is how is this particular business or this particular persona going to make their decision? Is it going to be based on price? Is it certain type of functionality? Is it their growth prospects? Is it something else? Whatever those decision criteria are going to be. And then buyer's journey is really kind of the end-to-end journey that they go through in order to make that purchasing decision. The thinking is that a buyer persona is formed by the journey of a business. Now, for us, by the way, this is an example of a buyer persona that we have developed for our business, for Avalara. Interestingly, this buyer persona is typically a controller, a tax manager, or a director, but it could also be an IT manager, because in many cases, IT managers make the decision about buying Avalara software. It could be CFO too. So it is possible to combine multiple titles together, as long as you know that the buying journey for that individual is identical. So that's what a buyer persona is, but you can, generically you can think of it as a title. It's, as a role or a title within an organization, but you do need to be mindful about what level this person is going to be at as the buyer, because you could, in B2B, especially in enterprise selling, you could have multiple levels of buyers. You could have people who are actually going to make the economic decision. You could have influencers, and then you could have users. All of them need to be part of your buying cycle.
You only have this one slide from the Avalara personas, but there were several others, right?
That's exactly right. And we continue to build those buyer personas because we have multiple products potentially, or else even the same products, but the buyer persona for a mid-market customer, which Alan is our mid-market persona, is different from Amy, who happens to be our enterprise persona. You see, actually not enterprise. It's our really small business persona, somebody who's under $5 million in revenue type of a business.
But even in any B2B scenario, there's typically a buying committee. Like, no one person is going to make a buying decision in an enterprise or in a B2B sale, at least in my experience. The user has to buy in. The final decision, yes, but like the user has to buy in. The technology department, the IT department has to approve the technology. Like there's layers of input into the final decision, and it's very helpful to understand all of the people who are influencing that final decision, and if possible, to have relationships with them. This is where you want to.
Yeah.
You don't want to have just a hub and spoke relationship within a company. Ideally,
Sure.
You can get on a call and understand, hear directly from IT, as well as the financial buyer, as well as the user buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Liz, you're absolutely right. I think the number of people involved in the decision-making process are going to be dependent on two things, at least that I can think right off the bat, right? One is how much does your product cost, right? The higher the cost, the more people are going to be involved in the decision-making process. And that's the reason people could purchase Smartsheet or Dropbox individually, right? Because it's below a certain signing authority. And the second consideration is going to be how big is the customer themselves, right? So if they're a really small business and you have like 20 people in the business, there's probably the CFO themselves, or maybe the CEO is going to make the decision. But the higher the product cost and the bigger the company, the more layers there are going to be in the decision-making process in B2B.
I think in general, you're right. I'll add one more factor, which is, how impactful is the adoption of the product to the company. So, this comes from my experience selling project management. The price point was not that high. Maybe some of the companies weren't very big, but adopting it would require, a whole set of change management activities to bring everyone to the new platform. So maybe the cost is high in terms of time, if not just straight dollars.
That's
so,
right.
Be mindful of what kind of work you're creating for your customer when they buy your product, because that will factor in as well.
Yes. It's well said. And then we have an example of a couple of consumer buying personas.
Yeah, and this is obviously from my my current marketplace business. So I'm showing two personas, one from each side of the marketplace here. On the left is one of our consumer personas. This is actually a real person who lives here in Seattle. we like to shorthand our consumers into two buckets. One is a maximizer and one is a satisfier. I should have a poll for which one you are. You know, we're in the business of finding people who know all the great people. And maximizers take pride in doing that research and finding the best and having a great list, in sharing that. They're proud of the list they've compiled. So Omar is a great example of that. He's made almost 60 recommendations. I think he has 2 exterminators, 2 electricians, you know, you name it, Omar has it. So he is a great persona for us. And we don't have a sophisticated persona in the way Avalara does, because we're an early stage startup, but we do have an internal shorthand where we say, like, you know, we need to get 100 more Omars onto the platform. So that's how we, in a kind of a quick and dirty way, create and use personas in building our business.
And I can vouch for the fact that Omar is a real person, because at the last presentation we did, Liz, if you recall, somebody piped up from the audience and said, "Hey, Omar is my manager at Microsoft." Yeah, that was pretty funny.
And then the other one, on the right-hand side, we have Sarah Eisen, who is a business owner. And she is an example of someone who has really adopted the platform quite well, has made many of her own recommendations, has, you know, accrued a number of followers, which is, you know, the behavior that we want to see. We want these pros to kind of become almost like little celebrities on FreshChalk, because they're so part of the community and adding so much value. And so, you know, when we hold them side by side, you know, our go-to-market strategy involves getting more of both of these types of users.
Yep. Any other questions about understanding your customer? Because, you know, that's about all we're going to talk about it. Again, in the spirit of trying to keep it simple. Okay, let's keep moving. So step number 2, messaging and positioning. So messaging, so when you're, you know, confronted with this idea of what do you even do around messaging and positioning? If somebody comes and tells you, do you have messaging and positioning for your business? A lot of people just freeze up because they don't even know where to start. And like we described, this is where you should be able to start. Okay, start with what the name of your product is. You know, describe the full name, short name, abbreviation, which you're going to use all the time, every time, no exceptions. You're going to build a 30-word description and a 100-word description of your product that you don't have to cook up every time somebody asks you for a description, because that allows you to be consistent, and that also allows you to more thoughtfully iterate on it as you learn more. The objective is not to stay static. The objective is to be consistent, and then know that you are going to continue to improve it. My suggestion would be, take these, whatever, 5 or 6 categories, messaging categories, open up a Google Doc, and then wherever you are, whoever you're describing it to, use the same terminology. You want to describe who your target customer is. What is the problem statement? That the top 3 problems that your typical customer is going to ask about when they describe their problems. What are the benefits that they seek in order to be able to use when they express a desire to use your product? So what is the so what? What does the customer want? What are the quantifiable results that they are looking to get out of all of this? Describe the product proof points. Tie the problem statement to the features that solve those problems very explicitly, very clearly. And then finally, customer proof points, which is around the case studies, testimonials, comments. And you know, in a typical B2B environment, you may have 2 different types of customer testimonials. There are the marketing testimonials, and there are sales testimonials. Marketing testimonials are what Liz was describing before. They require legal clearance from your customer. They may require PR clearance from your customer. But once you do have them, you can use them extensively for your marketing. You can put them up on your website. You can use them in your sales decks. etc. Sales testimonials, on the other hand, are essentially a verbal agreement with your customer or with an individual inside your customer environment who will who has basically agreed to talk to a new prospect for you. Okay, they say basically you're going to go ask them, hey, I understand getting this marketing testimonial is hard, but can I have a prospect talk to you? Will you pick up the phone for them? And once they do, that becomes your sales testimonial. Now, you'll build those over time. That doesn't have to happen right away. But again, start to build those comments and testimonials. And what is important from a messaging perspective is how they describe your product, because that is going to help you continue to refine your messaging and positioning around the product. Thoughts from you, Liz?
I think this is one where there's a temptation to kind of set it and forget it, to write these down, and then you're moving fast, you're copy pasting, you're putting your blurb into your email to whoever, and it's your 30-word description. And I think these should never be static. Like there's always ways to improve your messaging. You should always be listening to what your customers are saying and what words they use to describe it, because sometimes their words are better than your words. You get too close to it.
Yeah.
Your very first messaging is going to be a blurb that you put in email to people when you're trying to get them to engage in some way, shape, or form with you about your business. And maybe one to add to this list would be a business description. And I think if you're an early stage company, if you have aspirations of raising money, if you are trying to make connections in a community, describing the business and not just the product is something you'll find yourself doing over and over again. And that would be helpful to have in your back pocket. So we're an early stage company founded by so-and-so who did blah, blah, blah. We've achieved such and such traction, and we're looking to blah, blah, blah in the next 6 months. So something that you can use when you're getting introductions or meeting investors that help size up the business in addition to the product.
Yep. Any questions, thoughts, comments from others? Okay. Good. So let's jump to the next step, which is, where do your customers congregate? So now that you have a sense for who your customers are and how do you describe your business and what are the benefits, now you need to combine those things. Well, now you need to figure out where do those customers go, because then you will use this understanding to be able to go to those places where your customers congregate. But what are typical examples of customers? Oh, there's a question. Are you going to compare messaging and positioning? No, we don't intend to do that on this call. At least we don't have any slides around it. But Liz, would you like to take a crack at that one?
I think of positioning as more of an internal exercise. At least that's where I go to, where positioning is something that you are using as you're talking about your overall strategy and how you compare to existing players in the market. Maybe that enters into your messaging in some way, but it's more around your company strategy.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's kind of the lines of what I was thinking about, which is there are so many different ways in which you could describe yourself to customers. I'll share some thoughts from what we're going through right now with Avalara. We are in the sales tax business, right? We sell sales tax software. Sales tax is a regulatory requirement. You would imagine that nobody needs to be persuaded to buy sales tax automation software. But what we are finding as we were looking at our win-loss data, what we discovered was over 75%, about 77% of the deals we lost were because of status quo, okay? And only 3% of the deals we actually lost to competition. Now that is a pretty telling statistic, you see. So that led to some internal discussion and thinking around, should we be changing the way we position the company to our prospects instead of positioning ourselves as a compliance software product? Okay, should we be and including compliance messaging, which is the government wants you to do it, you better do it or you'll get audited and you'll be toast. Instead of that messaging, should we really be thinking about, hey, you are currently spending close to 100 grand a year on your sales tax compliance. You can save all of that money if you invest $15,000 a year on Avalara software. That's one example. Now, you have decided to position it. Now you'll build the messaging underneath it. And very consistent with what Liz was describing, it's your internal strategy around how you're going to describe your business to your prospects. And then the messaging will follow the positioning exercise, which is.
And to yourself, it can drive your product strategy as well. I mean, James is asking, you know, we have a very crowded market. Our customers want to know how we're better. We have to cut through the noise and have them coming to us because of our positioning. But we had a very similar thing at Liquid Planner, which was, you know, when we introduced ourselves to the market, we were a project management system. And our key differentiator, and this is really important. It sounds like you are different, but it's not coming through. Our key differentiator was scheduling. And it took us a while, but eventually we distilled that the real need behind scheduling is resource management, which is a different position in the market than project management. And so over time, we incorporated more of a discussion around resources into our messaging, so that people reading it, even though they might have searched for project management software and found us, we were making the light bulb go on about resource management, which is what our differentiator really supported in the business. So I think it does come down to really elevating that differentiator in your messaging and making sure that you feel really confident. There are people who will just die for that thing that makes you different. Like they will just go to the hill for that because that thing alone is so important to them.
Yes.
Scheduling.
I think that's a great, and you remind me of this Venn diagram that we used to talk about. So imagine a Venn diagram which has 3 circles. The first circle is what your customers want. The second circle is what your product has, and the third circle is what your competitors have. You see, where you don't want to build your product capabilities is at the intersection of all 3 circles. You see, I know I'm trying to, this is kind of a visualization exercise. Where you want to build your product capabilities and even your messaging is where the circle of your customer and your product meet, but that does not include your competitor circle, because that's where you want to, as an early stage company, you want to focus on, which is things that your customers want and you have, but your competitor does not have. Mm-hmm. There is no point investing time, resources, money, activities on areas that are going to be table stakes anyway.
That's right. Yeah, we have recommendations from your friends. We also have maps, directions, and all those things, and they'll never show up in our messaging.
Yeah.
Oh, someone posted the Venn diagram.
Oh, wow. Did you see it yet? I haven't seen it. Thank you. There you go. I'll share it right here. This is called real-time presentation. I love it. Okay, so this is exactly the Venn diagram I was talking about. Maybe I can make this slightly smaller. There you go. So what your customers want, oops, here comes marketing. What your customers want, what you do best, and then what your competitor does best. This is where you don't want to be. Building any product capabilities in this area is a waste of time and money, right? What you want to do is focus both your product as well as your marketing messaging on this area where you have what your customers want, but your competitor does not have. Simple, but very evocative. So thank you, Alexandra, for sharing that. Appreciate it. Cool. So where do your customers congregate? Now, we are going to give you a laundry list here, but the objective really here is to spark your thinking about, based on your understanding of your customers, where do you think your customers go for information? That's the question that you're trying to answer. And so, again, laundry list, sorry about this. We're trying to give you tools that you can use right away, okay? So there are a number of different places that customers go to. They go to blogs, or they use blogs regularly. They look at publicity that is generated by companies. They use search engine marketing. That's one of the most frequent ways in which people learn about products. Social and display ads. Now, I won't go through the entire list. I would say, though, that there's one statistic that was pretty telling, and I think we'll get to it as we talk about a sales funnel, which is in B2B circles, Gartner estimates that 60% of a buyer's journey is done online before they even talk to anybody about the product from a vendor. So important to know that with the availability of materials online and reviewers and reviewing firms and analysts, there's just so much information available out there. But that is all of these things are also your opportunity to be there when they are looking for that information. Anything you want to call attention to here, Liz?
I guess there aren't too many people congregating at trade shows or offline events right now.
Yeah, that's true.
You can cross a couple off the list.
Yeah, you know what is interesting for us, and I'm glad you mentioned trade shows. For Avalara, events and trade shows was a huge part of our marketing strategy. I would say we participate in anywhere from 350 to 400 events or trade shows a year, okay? And all of that has come to a complete standstill. And as you can imagine, we've had to pivot our strategies to be able to do that. And now we have to figure out different ways in which we are going to be able to reach our customers. One of the ways we are going to do it is leverage some of the virtual events that some of our partners are doing. We used to participate in some of our partner trade shows. So yes, again, the value of pivoting and being able to be flexible and do whatever life gives you.
Yeah, it's really challenging right now. I think a lot of businesses, whether it was with in-person events or just in-person meetings,
Yeah.
the air's been sucked out of the room a little bit on some of these marketing channels. And
yeah. So there's a question here: is creative original content worth the spend? So I'm assuming that the question is about content marketing.
Maybe David could pick up and give some context.
David, do you want to elaborate on this at all?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Just to let you know, I have a stutter. Okay, just to let you know.
No worries.
Ours is a advanced technology business. It involves a lot of engineering and science. And my marketing team wants me to contribute original writing and thought leadership. And they want to use that to build a positioning strategy around us being innovation leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Liz. Do you want to take that?
I mean, I definitely can understand their motivation in asking you for that. I think for a very technical product, a lot of buyers like to see something more meaty and almost more academic as part of their buying process. So people create white papers, and those white papers become circulated, and there becomes, and maybe that's you and your business, but there does become someone who is the face of the company on the innovation side, and is the trusted authority who makes the buyer feel comfortable with their buying decision. So I think, yes, that would be a good use of your time, even though I'm sure you could find other things to do with your time. I think it could be very helpful.
I can find other things to do.
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments on that. First one is, yes, content marketing is incredibly valuable. But I'll also say that it's incredibly hard to do, because it's one of those things that if you start it, you need to have a sustainability plan around it. It's very easy to start a blog. It is not easy to continue to write a blog, or whatever else, thought leadership content. So the flash in the pan kind of stuff never happens. You have to stay consistent, because you need to wrap it around a real strategy around where you're going to place that content, where are you going to syndicate it, how are you going to promote it, etc. And if you just plan to write an article or a post once a month, or even less frequent than that, that's not going to be terribly helpful. The second thing I'll say is, I know it's helpful because I was looking for, when I joined Avalara, I was looking to do win-loss interviews. I really wanted to understand from the people who bought our product versus who didn't buy our product, why did we win or lose those deals? And I was just searching the web for interesting material that I could just call up people and do my own interviews. I discovered this firm. They had written an amazing article about how to do win-loss interviews. Turns out they were also a win-loss vendor, but they were willing to provide guidance to people. And supposedly that guidance would take people away from their offering. But, I tried their guidance and a few interviews, and eventually discovered this was not sustainable for me. And so I contacted them, because I discovered that they contacted me because as soon as I downloaded their white paper, I had to enter my phone and email information. They contacted me. They said, this is what we do. That led me to securing budget. I looked at a couple of vendors and eventually ended up choosing them. And now they are at least 100. What's that?
You walked right into the trap.
What's that? What?
You walked right into the trap. You did exactly as that team wanted.
That's exactly, and that's why I say it was perfect. It worked, right? And now they are, they have over $100+ grand contract from me every year. They do all of my win-loss interviews. They do about 100 interviews for us every year. And so anyway, it does work.
There was a question on this topic from James in the audience, who said his team wants the same thing, but the people are too busy to stop and write it. And can they use outsourced writers? I've had success in hiring writers who actually, and you might have someone from the product team or the marketing team in the room, but actually interview the CEO or the CTO, record the interview, and then write, put pen to paper and write the piece, but that the content and the voice and the words are all coming from the executives. So it would be faster for them to extemporaneously talk about the thing that they have knowledge in versus crafting a written piece, but it still needs to sound like it needs to be in their voice. And so you want a writer who can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's very good. Thank you.
Right. All right. Any other questions, thoughts? All right. So, Liz, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, these questions are really designed to help you narrow down the channels on the prior slide to the ones that are right for you and your business and your stage. This is from a book, and I should have double checked the name of it before I got in, but I think it's think it might be growth hacking, but the idea is that you're really looking for the strongest 2 or 3 channels that might work for your current business goals. And the factors are, how much does it cost? So for instance, in our consumer business, we're pre-revenue. There's no way I can go out and spend a bunch of money on ads. Like, I just can't justify it. I won't be able to prove the value. We don't have that kind of budget. We need to look at other strategies. So already out of the gate, I can make some eliminations based on cost. But you also have to look at how many customers are available. So this might help you eliminate things like offline events. If you need to reach 100,000 people and only 50 people attend each event, you're going to have a really hard time reaching your goal. And the last one is, are the customers in the channel the right ones for you right now? Going back to search engine marketing as one example, if you are in B2B enterprise sales, you can probably turn on search engine marketing and fill your funnel with some leads. And I'll tell you right now, they're going to be looky-loos, SMBs, buyers who are not serious about purchasing your product. They're just looking, they're kicking the tires. You will have to weed those out from the real, the very few nuggets of real gold that you get from that channel. So I feel like I'm sounding a little bit negative on all of these, but I do think that you want to save yourself time by eliminating channels that you think will, are not the best fit for you at the moment. Yeah. So when we went through this exercise, we ended up, if you can go back a slide prior, we ended up narrowing in on SEO, on viral marketing, and on community building as our strategies for this first phase of our marketing efforts. And once we have that center of the bullseye, that's when you start testing and working those channels and trying to maximize them. There is kind of this unwritten rule in marketing, I think, and Sanjay, we can debate this, but you get very excited when you find a channel that works. At some point, the gravy train will run out and that channel will be exhausted and you'll have to find a new channel. And it's just kind of, it's part of the game. And, if you start with your highest priority channels, you will eventually probably do something in many different channels, but you start with your, top 3.
Yeah.
Monica's asking how long you should test a channel strategy before giving up on it.
How much money do you have?
How much time do you have? How many people do you have? Yeah, I think it varies so much. It's hard to give a response to that question that's specific enough.
Yeah, instead of thinking about a single channel and how long should you test it, I think I would go back to what Liz said, which is you're testing few channels together, right? Imagine, a set of black boxes that are on this slide page, okay? You put in $1, what do you get back? What do you get out of it on the other side, right? And if you have a number of those black boxes going, and you have a sense that, is that sound coming from Mike?
I'll find the person that needs to be muted.
It was weird. Okay, but imagine a set of black boxes, laid across the page. You put in $1, you get $10 on one, you get $5 on a second one, you get 50 cents back on the third one. Clearly, you need to get rid of that third one as long as you have done whatever you need to do in terms of testing the right messaging, targeting the right people, etc. So, and it's as simple as that. Now, of course, as you become more sophisticated at testing those channels, you will discover that maybe you missed out something the first time around and you can go back to it. But eventually, it's all about how can you put $1 in and get $100 out or $10 out or whatever that ROI is for you. All right. Anything else on this, Liz, from you? But this is a great checklist. This is a great set of questions to ask, right? But how do you decide what channel to go after? All right, so this is this is something that you will absolutely need to familiarize yourself with if you're doing any type of marketing or sales. And this concept of a sales funnel or a buyer journey is something that you should really understand for your particular business. You know, the fundamental steps remain pretty consistent. It's awareness, interest, consideration, and purchase. And then loyalty is when somebody's already purchased your product, are they going to buy more of your product? Or are they going to buy more products from you if you have more than one product? So that sales funnel more or less remains the same. That buyer journey remains the same for everyone. Now, in many cases, some steps might get combined together. There are other times where a consideration phase may be very, very long because it's an enterprise product. You know, B2G will probably take anywhere from 18 months to 36 months to actually close a sale. I know this because I used to be in a business where we were selling healthcare software to the Blue Cross Blue Shields across the country. And so, and even though they're quasi-governmental entities, they're not exactly government entities, but some of those organizations are by definition going to take a lot longer to make that decision. But this is something that you absolutely have to be familiar with. One of the important, anyway, before I move forward, any thoughts from you, Liz, on this?
Keep going.
All right. The important concept that you need to understand is that if you put 100 leads on top of that funnel in the awareness funnel, there's probably one customer who's going to purchase it. And I'm talking about when you're thinking about it at scale in some way. Those are the ratios that you're dealing with. One of the most frequent flaws we found in entrepreneurs thinking about sales and how they projected their sales was they felt like they were going to go in with 100 leads and they're going to get 100 sales out of that. And once you start appreciating this sales funnel and how can you make it flatter, right? Which is you put in 100 leads. If you can, instead of getting one customer at the end, if you can get 2 customers, you've suddenly doubled your conversion rate. That counts for a lot. What that means is now you have less compulsion to put so many more leads at the top in order to get the same revenue. On the other hand, you also know that if you put fuel at the top, you are indeed going to get good conversion. And that conversion is a constant battle for businesses, whether you're an early stage startup or later stage. Now, early stage, it doesn't matter as much. This funnel may not apply as much, but you need to be cognizant of the fact that these fundamentals of a sales funnel or buyer journey will apply to you no matter what. Liz, anything from you on this?
I think I might have a little more to add on your next slide.
Okay, let's go right into it. Go ahead.
Okay, well, before we get into the tactics, I guess just one word on how this translates into kind of the real world. And if you have ever been part of an existing functioning enterprise sales team or B2B sales team, you will probably map these stages of the funnel to these kind of industry acronyms. And those are the things that you want to start tracking and measuring, because somewhere along the funnel, you're probably going to start losing more people than you should. You're always going to lose some. Like, it is impossible to get from stage to stage without losing some. But you may be losing a disproportionately high number of people at a certain stage. And that is a signal to you that you can optimize your sales process at that stage. So for instance, we would start with awareness or someone indicating interest on our website and we would call that an MQL, a marketing qualified lead. We have some proactive interest from a potential buyer. Our sales development team would then try to convert that MQL into a sales qualified lead. And that means that they're expressing interest in a demo. They're going to actually engage with us and like talk to a human being. And we would actually, we would try to get, I think, 60% of MQLs to convert to SQLs. The exact number doesn't matter. And then from there, does an opportunity exist? So can you convert from your demo to an actual sales opportunity? And there I can't remember the exact numbers, but again, at each point, if you are not hitting kind of the industry benchmarks, you can be introspective and say, well, maybe our demo needs work. Maybe we're not really communicating the value in the demo, because when we get them to an opportunity, we do win the deal, but we're not getting enough demos to convert to opportunities. Or similarly, if you get people to really engage in the sales process, but you can't close them, there could be a problem in how you're negotiating or how you're pricing or how you're executing the deal itself. So all of this can inform optimization strategies for how you sell your product. That might be a lot for early stage, but.
Yeah. And one thing, and those are absolutely great points. One thing to also think about is it could be just your messaging. What do you say on your website, on your data sheet, or what your sales reps are saying when they're talking to customers, the way they're describing your products, the way they are articulating the benefits or the value proposition of the product. There's a lot of that again, low-hanging fruit in terms of optimizing, testing, etc.
And if you are losing customers after you close them, that could indicate a problem with your onboarding process or your customer support, or whether the product meets the promise that you made about it. So you just want to kind of be watching where the leaks are.
That's right. That's right. And that's why, and I failed to mention this in the last slide, but that arrow from loyalty to aware is important, because the more, especially in subscription businesses, which is what every cloud-based company is doing now, retaining your customers and having the ability to sell them more is just so incredibly valuable. Avalara has a 92% retention rate, and I know we can increase that because we have certain areas that we can improve. We know that, but 92% is pretty darn good. And imagine now we have 92% customer retention rate, but our revenue retention is, I want to say, about 112%. What that means is that from the same set of customers, we are now generating more revenue. That arrow that you see on this slide is actually working to where we are selling more of the same product, and we are selling more products to them.
Yeah.
Now go ahead, Liz, sorry.
Your net retention number.
That's right.
Is actually the most important.
Yes, that's exactly right. So, and the point of this slide, honestly, which is different from anything that Liz and I have talked about thus far, is that you use different tactics for different parts of the funnel. That when you're trying to fill the top of your funnel, you use social media, PR, advertising, content marketing, etc. But then as you go further down, you want to provide you use different tactics, you provide different types of materials, different collateral, different types of information to your customers. And I know this is very focused and very relevant to B2B type of businesses, but, and I'll let Liz add the consumer flavor on it. But the idea remains that you have to be cognizant of where you are in the sales funnel with a particular prospect to be able to get them to the right set of materials that they need in order to close the sale. Anything else you would add to this, Liz?
No, I think we can probably move on to the consumer version of this.
Oh yeah, that's right. We have the consumer. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for us in a consumer business where consumers aren't paying anything, we still have to put a lot of work into acquiring them. They pay us by joining the site and adding content and being engaged and being part of the community. And so we have that same sense of a funnel. If we can get someone to join and add a recommendation, can we get them to come back and follow someone else or participate in a conversation? And I think a lot of the work, at least in an online business, different obviously in a consumer product business, but it really is product work. Like the product is the marketing in many, many ways. The product has to, put the right hooks or baubles in front of you when you're using it to make you want to take the action to move to the next stage of the funnel. So there's a really close collaboration required between marketing, who is really defining the goals for the users, and the product team, who is deciding what to build. And maybe that's on the next slide, I think.
Yeah, so we talk about the tactics here, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So right now on our site, anybody can come in without registering and see basically all of the content. But if my goal is to get registered users, I'm going to have to figure out ways to, put some of the value behind a registration wall, so I can get people's contact information and build a relationship with them. So these are some of the strategies or tactics that we kind of associate with the different phases for consumer.
So there's a question: sales funnel for B2B and B2C are same. I guess the question is, are they the same? What do you think, Liz?
Well, for instance, I think we substituted the word joined for considered.
Consider, yeah.
And active for purchased. So they're not quite the same, but there is a mapping there, where for us, an active engaged user, even if they're not paying, is probably as valuable as a paying customer for a B2B site. That's a metric that we're trying to achieve, is a certain number of active engaged users. Even if the users themselves don't pay, that will support the overall business model, which will eventually be businesses paying. So if that makes sense.
And back to the point that I mentioned earlier, this funnel is not just going to change by B2B and B2C. It's also going to change by the product you're offering. How large is the ASP, or the average selling price for the product? How long does it take for it to sell, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those things are going to determine what that funnel looks like, the labeling of it, how long it takes in each stage of the funnel, what is the attrition out of the sales funnel, et cetera. So we created this table to kind of summarize a lot of these tactics that can be used in order to reach prospects. What we tried to do here is, take some of these tactics that are more air cover. And I know I need to change this demand gen thing on it, but the idea is there are some air cover that you use kind of more broadly, a little more scattershot, I would say, not meant in a derogatory term, but more broad. And then there are others that are a lot more focused. And some of these tactics will be different depending on whether you're trying to sell to a consumer or a small business or a mid-market business or an enterprise business. But I'm not going to go through each one of these, but the point remains that, while social media may remain relevant to consumer and VSB and maybe even to small business, it may not necessarily be that relevant to mid-market or enterprise.
There's a question actually that came in just before you moved to the slide about social media specifically, channels, content generation, and the experience there. So maybe we could go a little bit deeper on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my experiences selling into mid-market, so Avalara is primarily mid-market. We have 35,000 customers. In the past, I have worked in enterprise businesses, Microsoft, as well as the healthcare software company I worked in, where a typical deal size was anywhere from 200 grand to about $10-12 million. So I've never seen a tremendous value for social media in those businesses. Now, that does not mean that every mid-market targeted business is not going to find value in social media, but that's not something that I have seen used very effectively in those businesses. And maybe we were just not creative enough, but that's my experience.
I think I have a similar experience. I think the most success we had, and this actually goes to James's question about LinkedIn for mid-market, is using social media platforms to do more targeted outreach. So using LinkedIn InMail, or even thinking about, I don't think this is on your slide, but on account-based marketing, where you're getting very granular in the titles, the companies, and the spaces that you are advertising to. And that can be successful. I do think there is some amount of, even if social media is not your channel, I do think there is an expectation from consumers, both business and B2C consumers, that you have some kind of presence, that they can see you have a heartbeat. Because a lot of times they'll look, and if your LinkedIn page isn't up to date, or if you don't have a Twitter handle, or you don't have a presence at all, it might look like nobody's home, and everybody wants to buy from a business that is out there and present and available. So I would say it belongs in the air cover category for good reason. That said, I know there have been some brands that have been tremendously successful in social media. I just haven't been part of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, we just want to keep an eye on time, because I think we're almost at the end of our window.
Yeah, so we have just one last slide, and actually that is a good wrap up for what we've been talking about again and again, which is always test, measure, learn, execute, and keep repeating that cycle. The key to success here is, no idea survives the real world. You will need to iterate, just get that in your head. Of course, you don't want to give up persistence at the expense of, moving too fast, of switching ideas too fast. But remember that be listening to customers, test your ideas, look at data where possible, where economically feasible, and then continue that cycle. Any thoughts from you, Liz?
I think that's right. I mean, we're like lifelong students as marketers. Just when we think we have a handle on things, the technologies change, the strategies change, the channels change. So we have to stay on our toes. And I think someone once said to me, actually, one of the founders of Smartsheet, which you mentioned earlier, said, marketers are the closest things to CEOs in the company, because marketers have to have such a deep product understanding. They have to know the customer. They have to understand the competition. They have to understand the outside world. And so if you are, whether you're a CEO or a marketer, like those things become your bread and butter, and they add tremendous value if you can do them well.
Yeah, that's all we have. Liz, I think there's an interesting question, point 4 about messaging. No slides on that. We did talk about messaging and positioning. I know it was quick. There is a question. I have not launched my startup yet. However, I started posting on social media, hoping to drive some organic traffic to increase awareness. Liz, do you want to just take this question quickly in the minute we have?
Scroll back up to see. So if it was a regular content post versus a paid post, you may not have a ton of control over who's seeing that or who's interacting with that. If it's a paid post, then you should be able to do more precise targeting and try to get people who are in the geographic region that you care about, or have other criteria that the platform allows you to target based on. I would say that it takes a long time to build a social media presence and brand on social networks. So it may just be too early. You might just need to keep working at it and trying different posts.
Okay, I think we should wrap it up. Otherwise, we'll never get invited again to an AOA webinar.
Taking our act on the road.
Exactly.
We really like to thank Sanjay and Liz for the sharing all their thoughts and their advice and the insights with us today. It's a great privilege to have them as our guests today. So thank you very much to both, and thanks to everyone for participating and all the active engagement.
Thanks,
Ryan.
Zijan. Thanks for inviting us. Appreciate
Thank you. All righty. Goodbye.
it. Bye.